Hello, welcome to the library this evening, and welcome to those of you who are watching via our online channels. I'm delighted to introduce Laura Redford as our speaker this evening. In addition to being co-author of Ozark Coverlets, she is a member of the Northwest Arkansas Handweavers Guild. The Guild was founded in 1949 in West Fork and is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year in 2024. As part of its celebration, the Guild will have an exhibit of textile art on display at the library starting yesterday through the summer, through July 31st, in the Lucky Day lobby, which is one floor down from here. Guild members will also be holding weaving demonstrations on June 11th and July 11th, so be on the lookout for those programs also. Laura began her weaving adventures some 40 years ago, and over the years has tried many different aspects of the art. She's taught both beginning and advanced weaving classes for 30 of those years. More recently, she's concentrated her efforts on the historical aspects of the weavers and their cloth. Laura, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. And I messed up your slide, sorry.
I'm going to back up one. As she said, the Handweavers Guild is celebrating its 75th anniversary. And if you have not been downstairs to see that exhibit, I do hope you will do so. This is one wall of the exhibit, and it's a really nice variety of techniques and fibers and everything you can think of. There are some 35 different pieces that are represented. This particular one is a friendship coverlet that our guild did a few years ago, and we'll talk about some of the individual pieces of the patterns of the coverlet at a later time. As she said, we were founded in 1949 in West Fork. There was a weaving shop and studio in West Fork, and that couple, husband and wife, along with Robert Barnes, who some of you longtime Fayetteville people may remember, and 12 other people, founded the Guild in 1949. And one of our big claims to fame is that in 1954, we held and I say we, I was not in the Guild at that time. The Guild held a workshop at War Eagle Farms, and in the fall of that year, they followed it up with what became the War Eagle Arts and Crafts Festival. So our Guild was the founder of the War Eagle Arts and Crafts Fair. And our guild administered it for, I think, 5 years, and then it became such a large enterprise that they created their own board of directors and their governing body and all of that. So while many of our guild weavers were still part of the fair, they were not part of the governing part of the fair. It continues to this day. It has changed a little bit, but it's still basically in the same location that it's been since 1954. And you see on the left some pictures of about that time. And on the right, you see community involvement, and our guild has always been very involved with the community. From the very beginning, we have, one of our emphasis has been on education and just simply spreading the word about what hand weaving is and teaching both children and adults. And so from 1949 to the present, that's what we do. And we offer this spring, we've offered 2 beginning weaving classes, one that's just passed and one that's coming up, and Deborah is our primary teacher for that. And in the fall, we also have another class coming up. And we're very happy to say that there is interest. People want to learn to weave and want to know about it. And so we're very pleased with that. So my other hat for this program is the coverlets. And let me go the right direction. And the coverlets themselves are very interesting, but it is the weavers and their stories that often make them most interesting. The Shiloh Museum has several coverlets in their collection, and this project that we call the Ozark Coverlet Project got started there when Marty Benson, who's in the top left, and I asked the museum if we could just look at their coverlets. And that kind of grew, Marty and I are both hand weavers, and that kind of grew into, let's document them. Let's write down what we know. Let's measure them. Let's analyze the fibers and do all of that sort of thing. And then write that up from the standpoint of being a weaver. And so you see us at work here, and often they would say to us, let's take a picture, and all they would ever get is the top of our heads because we're examining the coverlets. And this was great fun. Marty and I would talk in shorthand, you know, back and forth, and complete each other's sentences, and it was really fun. And the other really integral person to this is standing on the ladder on the left is Carolyn Reno, and she's the collections manager at Shiloh. And she was instrumental in helping us do this project. And once we got through with it, the museum decided that it was worthy of publication. And so they published the book, which, by the way, happens to be on sale back there. Shameless plug. They published the information about the coverlets and their weavers. And we had a wonderful book designer who, I'll just let you pass that around and flip through it a little bit. We had a wonderful book designer who made it just, I think, a beautiful book, even apart from my own little prejudices about it. I think it's a beautiful book. But what is a coverlet? How does it differ from every other bedspread or that you can think of? Well, let's talk about quilts. A quilt generally, let's say this is the front of the quilt, and it will have cut out pieces of fabric that are sewn together to make a pretty design. And then on the back, there's going to be a backing that sometimes is a pretty piece of fabric, but that's not your main design. And then in the middle, there will be some kind of batting, or maybe it's an old blanket or something of that sort to create some insulation and some warmth. So it's a sandwich. It's the front, the back, and the middle part. A coverlet, on the other hand, Deborah, comes off the loom, is hand woven, comes off the loom just like this. It's not a sandwich. You see, it's basically a piece of fabric. And in this case, there's let's see if there's, here's a seam, and here's a seam. So this was probably the width, the width of what was woven, and then 3 widths were put together like this. And they could only weave as wide as their loom. So that's why almost always these coverlets are 2 panels and sometimes 3. And you see the design is the colors. In this case, it's sort of a reddy orange and a black brown.
So is it sewn together with a sewing machine?
Well, the strips are sewn. In this case, let's see, is this a sewing machine? No. Yes, this actually is a sewing machine. Oh. Most of them, however, are hand sewn.
This one is hand sewn.
Yeah, I think that may be a patch.
Okay, that could be.
Because this one is definitely hand sewn.
But the kind of orangey and brown are woven in. That's integral to the fabric. Mm-hmm. Now this coverlet is not an Ozark coverlet. I don't know its origin. I think it came from Texas, so it may be Ozark, because an awful lot of Ozark people went to Texas during the Civil War. They may have taken it with them and it stayed there, and then it found its way back. But it's one that I can carry around. The museum doesn't like it for when I carry them around and do this with them. So
Does this date to the Civil War?
I don't know where this one came from. I don't know.
It's not new.
It's not new. No, it's not new. But look at the back. Look at the back and see how vivid the colors are.
I would pick that for the front.
Yeah,
Well, that's what this looked like.
yeah. Sunlight is not real good for textiles. So I'll leave this up here and you can look at it. So that's what a coverlet is. Comes off the loom.
The question is, what's the fiber in that?
Okay. The natural color fiber is cotton, and the orangey and brown black are wool. And if you look real closely, you can see that these are very, very fine. So they've been spun very, very fine thread, which is the mark of a fine spinner. You'll have to forgive me. I don't hear well anyway. I have an ear infection, and so she's my ears right now.
Okay.
So she'll repeat whatever. All right. So that's what a coverlet is. And now let's think about what went into making them. So in this time frame, this happens to be a mother and her daughters and a daughter-in-law. And on the right, she's picking the seeds out of the cotton with her fingers. And I've been told that's very, very hard on fingers. So if they had a little cotton gin, they would have used that. But this is obviously a posed picture. So on the right, she's picking the seeds out. On the left, she's carding it, which means getting the threads all lined up in the same direction. And then she's spinning, and then after it's spun, she's winding it onto the clock reel. And the clock reel is a specific distance around, so she knows after she's gone, let's say 100 rounds, she has this many yards of thread. So that is cloth production or fiber production from this time period. And coverlets would have been woven on a loom similar to this. This particular loom is in the Ozark Folkways building in Winslow. And we don't know its origin, but it is similar to ones that might have woven the coverlets. And in general, coverlets were woven from the late 1700s up through the late 1800s. And there was a conventional wisdom, the Eastern experts who told us when we started this, no coverlets were woven west of the Mississippi River, and none were woven after the Civil War. Well, we disproved that because many of the coverlets in this book were woven after the Civil War and in this area. Now, some of them were brought here from Tennessee, but many were woven here too. So we kind of disproved that. But here is a picture of, on the top, you see what we call the threading draft. And that's the instruction to the weaver for how to thread her loom. And below, you see the picture of what it should look like. And in fact, that's what this is right here. And here is a picture of that same draft if you want to see it up close and personal, although to be honest, you can see it better there than. So this threading draft is in the collection at the University of Arkansas. And in order to prove some of them, we wove several pieces. This one, and this is another one from the university collection. So here it is in blue, and here it is in red. And we started with a draft that looked just like that. Now remember that our weavers, many of our weavers, probably couldn't read and write. They didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water, They probably had a dozen kids and a cow and chickens and a garden, and they were able to create things like this.
So,
And here's a picture of,
Laura?
so in that pattern, is it just all the ones going this way? Or does it tell you?
this is the warp that goes this way, which is stretched tight on the loom, and then the pattern, the red in this case, goes back and forth, left to right.
The question is, what did that little slip tell you? Was that just the warp?
Oh, that's the warp, yes.
That's just
That's
the
the warp.
Okay.
That's how you thread the loom to create the pattern. Thank you. Okay, in this picture with showing Lincoln, there is a coverlet on the far left. So they were even on the battlefield. I mean, that's how ubiquitous they were during this time period. But not all coverlets were woven by the end of the Civil War. This one in particular we know was woven near the end of the 1800s or possibly very early 1900s, because we know that Matilda Mustaine, the woman on the left, wove it, and she was going to weave one for every one of her 8 children. And the granddaughter who donated this coverlet did not know if she had managed to do that or not. But there was at least one other coverlet in the family that was black. So she'd use black thread for one and red thread for the other, both of which are kind of unusual. And here's a good picture of the 2 panels. This came to the museum in 2 panels, and so they kept it that way. They didn't put it together, obviously, and it shows very well how the 2 panels would have been put side by side and then sewn. And the woman on the right is Matilda's sister. And do you notice that she's missing part of her right arm? I know there's a story there, but we have never figured out what it is. We don't know what it is. But she's missing part of her right arm. But this is the coverlet that actually got us started. This was on display at the Shiloh Museum for several years. And you can tell that it looks very complicated. In fact, it's on the cover of the book, so you can get a much better close-up view. And here it is. Now, we talked about the center seam, and this coverlet is so well done, you cannot see the center seam. It's right here. And the only way you can really tell it is that it didn't line up quite right at the bottom and the top. But in the middle, it lines up beautifully. Now, you think about our weaver, she's got to figure that out so that both sides come out the same. And then on each side that's going to be joined, she's got to figure it out so that there's half a pattern on this side and half a pattern on this side, so that when they go together, she gets a full pattern. This coverlet was woven by, not pointing here, was woven by Letty Mills. She's a very interesting character in her own right. She was born in 1828 or 1829 in Indiana, and she's the youngest of 10 children of strictly religious parents. And they moved to Arkansas settling near modern-day Elkins in about 1833. So she was very young. And until we started working on this, I didn't know that there was any Quaker settlement in Arkansas, but apparently there was. While still a teenager, she married George Washington Lewis, and they settled on land that her father gave them. So she was relatively well off, both as a child and as a young married woman. And he built a mill, a grain mill, and was so successful that in 1851 they built a large brick house. So again, she had a relatively easy life given the time. And George was a staunch Unionist, but because of his Quaker connections, took no part in the war. But he is credited with grinding grain and for both Northern and Southern sympathizers. And it's said that he probably kept many people alive during this time, and then later during times when the crops didn't come in or whatever, because of he gave grain to people who needed it. At one time they had to move to Fayetteville for their own safety during the war, but they went back to their farm place, and Letty continued to live on the home place until she died in 1913. This is another picture of her. I bet she was feisty. Don't you imagine?
Okay, what is going on with the hair? Does she have something wrapped around her head?
I don't know. Do
lose her
Quakers
hair?
usually wear bonnet kind of things?
Something on the back.
I never thought about
On
that.
the back of her head, she's got something.
Yeah.
Because it looks like she's bald. Not that that matters to we. Just going.
Yeah, but it's fun to think about those things. It's fun to think about those things.
Well, and to look at someone like that and look at these things and think, it's almost a disconnect that they could be so rural and
Yeah.
and conservative and yet do all this beautiful stuff.
And she was almost 90, right? She lived.
When she died.
Yeah.
I think that's right. She died in 13, and she was born in 28 or 29. Now, textiles very often are not on display because they're a little delicate. Light in particular is hard on them. But right this minute, we have on this coverlet, and this particular setup is on display at the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. They have a wonderful exhibit called Tracing the Threads, Weaving in the Arkansas Ozarks. And in part, it highlights our guild. Our guild meets there, and we've had connections with that museum for a good many years, even before we started meeting there. So they took the history of weaving from the very earliest settlers to up through today. And this is the early settler part. So here you see a coverlet on the bed, and there it is up close. And I wove a little piece. And one of the things that is somewhat unique about this is that it is the traditional dark navy blue, but also kind of a peacock blue. It's not quite peacock blue. So that color doesn't show up a whole lot. But it's a very pretty coverlet. Now, on this particular one, and it doesn't show real well in this picture, but here is the center seam. And you see it doesn't quite match. So this one didn't come out quite right, for whatever reason. This coverlet was woven in the home of Sylvanus and Catherine Blackburn. This picture was taken about 1870. He was one of the early settlers. In 1832, he settled on a bend of the War Eagle River. Now remember, we talked about War Eagle Arts and Crafts Fair? That's where he settled. That very same spot, and then years later, the War Eagle Arts and Crafts Fair happened there. But that's where he settled and then went back and got his family. And he actually had quite a little empire going. He had a grist mill, timber. He had several sons. And after the war, one of them set up another very large lumber operation that supposedly supplied the timber for Old Main here in Fayetteville. And that coverlet that we just saw was woven in that house. We don't know if Catherine wove it, but we know that it was woven in that house. But now our coverlets are decorative and they're special, And that's one reason sometimes they have survived, is because they've been taken care of. They were given as maybe a wedding gift or whatever, so they have survived. But you have to remember that there was this everyday weaving that had to take place. They couldn't go to JCPenney or Walmart and buy sheets and towels and throw rugs. So they're weaving them. And on the left, you see a rag rug. And on the right, these two blankets are just plain weave blankets, but very utilitarian. They would be the perfect thing for a light evening. They're probably wool. This, I believe, also is a wool blanket. So in this exhibit, we see the pretty coverlet, but there's also some everyday weaving that was probably more important and they did a lot more of than they did of the coverlets. Now this coverlet is a little more traditional in some ways. It's all one color, traditional indigo blue. You see this pattern is a very large repeat. And to my way of thinking, this would have been even more difficult than the small repeat patterns to get your center seam to match. Can you see the center seam? It's right in the middle.
I can see it, but it's matched up pretty darn.
It's right there. And look how well it matches. The pattern is continuous. This is on that old loom that's probably not level, on a floor that's not level, with no electric lights. It amazes me that they could do it, and they did. This is in the collection of the Washington County Historical Society, and it's kept at Headquarters House, which is just a few blocks over there. And we had great fun the day we went there because they didn't know what they had. And so we took a quilt off of this bed, and we found another coverlet, and we threw it back, and here was this one. And we threw it back, and here was a white dimity, all cotton. They didn't even know what they had. And so it was great fun to educate them about what they had in their own collection. Here's a close-up, and with the tape, you can see how big, about 12 inches across, just for this one part. This pattern is called, it's actually a variation of Governor's Garden. And this part right in here is often called a garden. You'll see it in other patterns as well. And we think we know the weaver. There she is. Charity Polly went by the name of Polly Kimmons Garrett. She probably brought this with her rather than weave it here. The speculation is she brought it from Tennessee when she and her family moved here. It is that coverlet, and I didn't put a picture in, I wish later I had, is one of the few we see with fringe. And so most Ozark coverlets don't have any fringe. But this one has some fringe that was made separately and then applied. Now, if you see coverlets from the Northeast, very often they have very fancy fringe with lots of knots and all kinds of stuff. But we don't see that in the Ozark coverlets. Charity was, let me give her dates correct. Charity's father was born in Ireland in 1763, and her mother, Peggy, was born in Virginia in 1773. And she married James Broomfield Garrett, and Garrett's a name we know here in northwest Arkansas. He was born, supposedly, in a covered wagon on the road from North Carolina to Tennessee. So this family moved a lot. Not unusual. They had 2 sons and 4 daughters, and they moved from Tennessee to Arkansas about 1857 or 1858, a farm about a half-mile east of Mayfield, which is on the far eastern edge of Washington County. Now, this is a very, very different coverlet from what we normally see. And I included this just in case you happen to have one in your cedar chest.
I wish I did.
This one is all cotton. It is called a honeycomb weave. These are much more prevalent in farther south and southeast of Arkansas. But every now and then one shows up here. And this one came from the Vernon sisters. It's a very pretty thing and very hard to photograph, which is why you see it kind of crumpled up, trying to get some kind of shadows going so you can see what it looks like. And this is Mary Rebecca Vernon. And we talked about these the drafts and the threading instructions. Here on the right, you see 4 different pieces of paper. Now remember, paper and ink were not just easily obtained at the time. So they would often use the backs of something, like a store ledger or the back of a letter, to put their threading instructions on. And these 4 pieces of paper were found rolled up in this cloth sleeve. And so, of course, we called these patterns in the sleeve. And several of those threading instructions we worked out to see what their, if they were woven, what they would look like. So that's, when we find the patterns like that, it's just, we love it, because that's such a direct link to the weaver and the cloth. And we don't find them all the time. Both of these, the white piece we just saw and these patterns in a sleeve, are in the collection at Shiloh Museum.
Do you also have the coverlet that you made out of them? Like,
We have some pieces.
okay,
We did small pieces
and it's pretty.
for the different, yeah. And finally, I love this picture. It's a child and a dog, but look what's in the background. That's a coverlet, and we very often find old photographs of families, and they're sitting outside because, you know, the photographers at the time didn't have flash. They couldn't take a picture inside, so it had to be outside. So they'd get a coverlet and tack it up on the porch and stand in front of it. And we have 2 or 3 examples, but this particular one I've always liked. So now, what questions do you have? And she brought a coverlet that I've already looked at, but we're going to look at again. So do you have questions?
Wait, I have a question about dyes. How did they dye?
Well, that's something we didn't get into very much, because it's neither Marty nor I have particular expertise in natural dyes. The blue, now this isn't, but the indigo blue probably was dyed with indigo. That was fairly easily available, both in plant form, but more often it was processed into a powder. And on old store ledgers, you'll find they'll list the things that people buy, and it'll say 1 cake indigo. And apparently it came in little cakes like this. Mm-hmm. There are other things like this kind of reddy orange may have been from madder root, but there are a lot of natural dyes that are used that our weavers could have just gone out in the woods and picked something and then processed it.
What about tea?
I'm sorry?
Tea.
Tea,
Like drinking tea.
Oh.
Is that
I don't know.
used?
I would think that would be hard to come by if you live way out in the woods.
Yeah.
But walnuts,
Walnuts?
walnut shells
All
would give
parts of
you
the
a
walnut
brown,
can
yeah.
be used. The whole,
The shell and the meat. And you get a little bit different color with each one. And if they had well water, depending on the minerals in their well water, they would get a little bit different color with this well water versus this well water. So there are a lot of recipes for dyes, and I just have to tell you that I'm not an expert in that. I've just told you everything I know about what dyes.
No, that's good, thank you.
Yeah.
So you don't weave your own thread with the,
Yeah, no.
okay, good to know.
No, I buy mine on a cone. If it doesn't come on a cone in the color I want, I could probably find something else, so.
How did you get started? How did you get interested in this? What triggered your passion for this?
How did you get interested in this?
Well, as she said in my intro, I've been weaving for about 40 years. And at the time, things go in cycles. And at the time, overshot, and I don't think I even talked about that. This type of weave is called overshot. And at the time I was learning to weave, this was real popular. It was everywhere. And one of my first weaving teachers loved overshot. Well, you're influenced by that first person in your life. And so it's always been interesting. But then, to me, when I got into the history and the people, I think that's what really tipped it off, because this is just a pretty coverlet. We don't really know anything about it. Some of these we just looked at, we know. That red panel, that piece that's in 2 panels, it just so happened, purely by accident, the day we examined that, we laid it out on the table like we always did, and we measured and we looked, and Carolyn brought out what they call the X file, which has whatever they know about the coverlet. And we're reading down, and we're looking at it on their wedding anniversary. Oh yeah, I still kind of get chills when I think of it, and that was, 5 years ago. And as it happened, that couple, Matilda and her husband, were buried just a few blocks away from the Shiloh Museum. And so that particular day I didn't have the opportunity to do it, but the next day I went by the cemetery. So I can't tell the story. And I told Matilda that her coverlet was taken care of, and it was, she should be happy that it was okay. See, that's how I got hooked into this, because these are weavers of this type of coverlet are women who, in a tough time. Most of them didn't have cash. It was a barter economy. They're having to make do, and they're making these pretty things. And so that's kind of how I got into it. Now, having said that, this is at, like year 30 or something of my weaving life. And so for the first 30, I did a little bit of everything else. But always a little bit of overshot. And then this project now has become my current thing.
So is there a pattern, what do you call this, the threads that go this way?
The threading pattern?
No, it's weft.
Weft.
So do you have a pattern for the weft?
Well, yes.
So did you just show us the woof?
The woof. Yeah, or the
Woof.
woof, or it could be woof, either one.
Or whatever.
I'm confused.
I mean, this seems not only beautiful, but extremely complicated and really.
It's not. It's
Oh.
not. Show her one of the in the back. One of the modern. Okay. And here's a good example. Now, this is the one the coverlet that's currently on display at Shiloh. Okay, we looked at that, and I think it looks kind of complicated. But as I was weaving this, I realized it's really not. Oh, I bet I'm messing up the mic. It's really not complicated. And that's the beauty of doing what your weaver did. You learn a great deal by doing that. And so this is just really 2 blocks here. So I went da 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 da, and all the way up here, it's just each of these snowballs is 2 blocks. So then when I got over here, now I know that doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but it's not like da 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 da. It's da 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 da. And then when I got up here, it's the other two, da 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 da. And so I didn't have to look at my instructions anymore. And I suspect that that's what our weavers did.
Yeah, this is a modern pattern.
Yeah.
And so this tells you how to thread it, and then this tells you how to do the warp, and then this tells you how to do the weft, right? So a modern I don't know how to read that, but the modern patterns are a lot easier to read.
Well, because that's what we know.
That's because we know.
That's this?
No, these are variations.
Oh, wow.
See, variations, but see, there's how to thread it, the warp, and then there's the weft.
But all our weaver from this time period needed was this. Because when she looked at this, she knew then how to do her feet, the treadling, to make the weft create the pattern. It's called Trompus Writ. We'll do a whole class here for you, more than you want to know. No, but she knew how to make the pattern come out just from this, just from looking at this. And she probably couldn't read or write. We have a number of these drafts where there is something that indicates the weaver couldn't read or write. Somebody else has written the person's name or something on there. That's what always blows me away. You know, I have to have a calculator and graph paper and my computer and to figure out some of these things. And
But wasn't their life super busy too? I just can't imagine
Yes.
making soap and bread and
Yes.
milking cows and whatever.
Yes.
It just seems like they did this because it was creative outlet too.
I've often wondered if it's the older
grandma types who are, you know, multi-generational homes. And if that's who's doing some of this kind of fancy weaving, or we know that children often would do some of the preparation, not necessarily the spinning, but the winding of bobbins and some things like that. So it's primarily a woman's occupation at this time frame, but it's probably the whole family that is involved in some way. And we're often asked, how long did it take you to do that? Well, first you buy the sheep, and then you plant the cotton. And so, you know, how long does it take?
I want to see her coverlet.
Yeah, are there other questions? This is a pretty coverlet. Come up here and show it and tell the story.
It said bring a government. Oh. I'll show it to you. It is not in wonderful condition.
Well, actually, for its age, I think it is.
This belonged to my aunt's mother. Now, the lady who owned it was named Sarah Taylor Mitchell. She was born in 1874 and in Logan County, Arkansas, which is where I'm from, which is down near Boonville, if you're familiar with Boonville, the other side of Fort Smith. And I don't know if she made it. It has a seam, and you can see the seam, and it's the seam is
But it's beautifully
hand
done.
done. It has a little on the end, one of the ends. It has almost like a fringe. See how they're
I
wrapped?
believe it is.
See how they're wrapped
It's knotted, yeah.
To
It
make-
is.
to make like a fringe. But I wrote up some provenance on it. It says, this coverlet belonged to Sarah Ann Taylor Muchler. Sarah was born on January 16, 1874 in Logan County, Arkansas. And I think it was in Chisholmville, which is just a wide spot in the road between Boonville and Paris. She was the daughter of Pleasant McDonald Taylor and Rachel Maria Jane Tyson Taylor. She was the granddaughter of George Taylor and Rhonda Smith Taylor. She married Herbert Mutchler, who was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He worked on the railroad, and there was a rail line that came through Boonville, and somehow they met. I'm not sure how, but anyway, they got married. Their only child, Eva Jo Mutchler, was born on August 30th, 1899. She was my aunt. Their only child, Sarah, passed away in 1964. She was 90 years old. Sarah's daughter, Eva Jo, married my mother's brother, Roy Franks, on November the 5th, 1922, and they had no children. Eva Jo and Roy lived in Boonville. She was a school teacher. She attended the University of Arkansas in a time when most women did not get a college education. He was a farmer, and he built houses on the side. Eva Jo passed away on January 19th, 1989 at the age of 89. I received this coverlet from Eva Jo's estate. Like I said, she didn't have any children. I've owned it for 35 years, and it has been packed away in folded up in a drawer for all those years. I've not had it out on display. I didn't really know what to do with it, but it was sacred to me because it was Aunt Jo.
So when do you think it was made?
I do not know. I don't know. I know that it belonged to Aunt Jo's mother, and Aunt Jo was born in 1899. We discussed this, Laura and I talked about it earlier. You know, her husband was from Pennsylvania. It could have come from there.
I believe this is not a home woven piece. Look at the backside. Yeah, to me, the white is as pretty as the dark. And this is what's called double weave. So there are actually 2 layers of cloth. The white layer is cotton, and the navy layer is wool, and they're being woven at the same time. And if this is the white layer on top, when the white layer needs some navy, then the navy threads come up and they're woven. And then back and forth, and then the next time it needs some navy, the navy threads come up. And the reverse is true. On the navy side, when it needs some blue, then those blue threads go down into that layer and they get woven. So this is a more complicated weave structure than our housewife weavers would have been able to do on their looms. Now, that's not to say that some people from that era didn't have fancier looms and were doing this kind of weaving, but they were probably professionals of some level. They were weaving for money more than for household. But I think this is a beautiful thing. It's so crisp. You know, it's very geometric and so crisp, and I think it's very pretty. And I suggested she check with a museum down in that area where the family came from. I don't know, I have a lot of books about professional weavers. I don't know if I could find anything in those books, but if you leave me your phone number or email or something, I will look in the next day or two and see if I can find it. I think this would just be stunning on a bed.
It is gorgeous. It is beautiful.
And well loved. I mean, you can tell
Yes.
it was used a lot.
You may not have used
Well,
it for 35
no, I
years,
didn't
but somebody
use it.
did.
I didn't, and I don't think Aunt Jo used it.
Yes.
I don't think she used it. It was her mother's.
Would any of that be damaged from like moths?
From
Like,
I don't think
moth
this is
damage.
moth damage.
I don't think
I
so.
think this is where it was folded.
Yeah.
You know, this is where it was folded.
I saw one spot, you know, because the blue is the wool.
Yeah.
So the only places there might be moth damage would be in the blue, probably. I mean, you know, silver
Yeah,
fit.
that-
Yes.
Silver,
Yeah.
silverfish could
Yeah,
eat
maybe.
boats,
Yeah.
Might have
but,
done that.
or some, something like that.
If you have something like this, you do need to get it out periodically and refold it on different folds.
Do you know what's
Because it is
folded on the
folding
rolls,
is
so
hard.
that there aren't any creases in it.
Yeah.
And that might be a good way to store it with it being
Yeah.
fragile.
So did it just, how the edges are like different, like, is this from the little kids playing with it, you know?
Well, this would have been the selvage edge,
Okay.
and our warp was going this way.
I just think it's well worn.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Well
thinking, the
used.
family.
Yeah.
with it.
This is interesting.
This would have drug the ground, maybe.
Yeah,
even.
might have.
Might have drugged
And it's two pieces. We were talking earlier, you were talking about three pieces or two pieces.
Yeah.
This is definitely just two pieces.
Yeah, which is more what we see here. But now, if this came from Pennsylvania, or
But
from
see,
a
we
professional
don't know
weaver.
that.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, but so now look at this on, here, I'm gonna let you hold
Okay.
this part. This has got a border. Here's a border,
Gorgeous.
and here's a border.
Yeah. Well,
So-
there's a border down there.
Okay, so this
But
is,
not
let's say
on
this
this
is the
end,
head
I
and the
don't
foot, but on the sides, when this was woven, this panel had to go around like that, because the border was on the right. So then after it came off the loom and it was cut, the panel had to turn around this way so that there was a border on the
So,
outside.
yeah, so what you're saying is when it was woven, this
This
was
was
over
over
here.
here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But look
Makes
how
sense.
beautifully it matches.
Yes.
That's,
They did a
that's
great
just
job.
really pretty. Did you get some pictures of this?
I did.
Thank you. Yeah, that's lovely. That's lovely.
It is fun. Well, Laura's been saying that double weave is really hard, but it is doable.
Oh, yeah.
It's not,
It's just typically not doable on the type of
no,
loom
that
our
they,
house,
that they had.
right,
Yeah.
that our house, that
That was.
this kind of weaver would have
So
had.
it's like layered, so
Exactly.
they were layering and
Mhm.
weaving at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And with double weave, you normally, some of these were like probably woven on a 4-shaft type loom. Double weave basically means double that, so you would have like 8 shafts.
bigger
Because you're
one.
doing 2 separate layers, so you have to have different treadmill setups. It is fun though.
When you do that, you need the equivalent of 2 looms on one loom.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because because you need enough, enough of mechanical pieces to do 2 pieces.
So this could easily have been purchased.
Could
But I think it would have been before the turn of the century.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because by the by the 1870s, that type of weaving was really going out of fashion. You know, the Victorian era had kind of come and gone, and they were back into other stuff, and so, yes, I'm sure, I'm reasonably sure that it does. Put your name on one of those
I will.
forms that they gave us. And so. Well, I thank you for coming, and I've enjoyed talking longer than I'm supposed to, I think, but thank you.